Now we pretty much all know each other. I don't know if it's going to be necessary to go around and introduce ourselves. I was
I think we
the
ought to do that. Just a
okay. I am the past editor of the Free Spirit Journal, which was in publication for what, about 13 years. Actually, more like 15 before counting the time before I took it over. And it was a magazine about alternative therapies with a particular focus on clearing, but not exclusively. We did stuff on psychic healing and remote viewing and channeling and all kinds of stuff like that. And we stopped it so that I could write, and we tried to start it up again with our friend Alan Walter. Alan had some other agenda for it and let it die, and Roger seems to know more about that. But die it did, and so we basically took it back by the provisions of our agreement. And I've been trying to resurrect it using Facebook. Not entirely successfully and not entirely unsuccessfully. A lot of this has had to do with me learning Facebook, which is, I find, very, very exasperating. I mean, it's basically put together for cat videos and baby videos and selfies, and they've tried to expand it into a business platform and advertising platform and marketing platform without really doing much work on the original technology. So, every time I try to post something or boost something or advertise something on Facebook, I go crazy with it. But I'm hanging in there. Anyhow. Roger, you care to? Yeah.
You want to hear about me now? I got into this clearing game. I was an old Australian swim champ, and I used to swim, up to 6 miles a day in training to boost performance. Luckily, my next door neighbor was the Olympic swim coach, Forbes Carlisle, and he got almost knighted. So my gig was enhanced human performance originally as an athlete. And in 1957, as part of my personal research, now I'm in my mid-80s now, so I go back a long way. I ran across the old Scientology gig, made its promises, and I did get some gains doing that. It didn't wholly add up. We'd already researched with Forbes he was at Sydney University at the time on faculty, and the psychological thing didn't work either, but I continued on with the spiritual quest. Now, Hank mentions the clearing tech that began his free spirit thing. I met Alan Walters in 1962 in Melbourne, and we were both athletes at the time, involved in enhancing our performance. So we became friends and so on and so forth and so forth. And we'd both done pretty much all of what was available under Hubbard's thing, which had a lot of stupidities in it.
And you were both athletes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems hard to think of Alan Walter as an athlete.
Well, when you met him at probably 3 or 4 or almost 500 pounds, yeah. But there are photos of him looking quite athletic and a bit of a stud. And I got photos of me looking, I'm still quite athletic. But I won my gold medal in 1954. So that's a long time ago by any standards. But being honest, if you really want to make it out of this game, once you get the cognition that you're a spiritual presence who is immortal, and you experience and get real certainty on earlier lifetimes and earlier screw-ups and earlier errors and things like that, you can get really dedicated to being honest with yourself to make it out. Alan and I did do that, and we stayed connected, and I reconnected with him in '94 after the church blew up. I went through that whole scene as well. And he did make some wonderful corrections to the erroneous technology that Hubbard put out. Now, Hubbard's game was basically a con game of fraud where he, like the bait and switch that the con man does. Alan went all the way. Unfortunately, as regards the free spirit that Hank mentions, Hank, we need to share the truth here. What happened was Hank did a wonderful job taking over or working with, but eventually taking over the free spirit from Mark Jones. Now, Mark actually recruited me for staff on the London org in 1966, 67. So we go back a little way as well.
We're getting a little bit far afield here.
Oh, okay. You want to hear about how the free spirit then blew up under waters or not?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess we owe it to ourselves. Certainly owe it to Norma.
I'm just giving you my background so you know where all this is coming from. So Mark, to me, was a saint. And when the church actually blew up in '82, he had and there's a whole story behind Mark's moving out of the church at that time. He set up the free spirit originally in order to hold together all of the folks who believed in themselves and their spirituality, and he called the free spirits, and he created the magazine, which Hank eventually took over. And as we all get older, we want to, free ourselves up and do something else. So eventually, one of Alan's staff, forgotten his name now.
Joel Hager.
Joel, good soul, good innocent soul, young guy. Never had the history that you and I had in the old game. He was gung-ho about accumulating the mailing list, promoting the Free Spirit magazine in order to facilitate the promoting of Alan's technology called Knowledgeism down at the ranch.
Yes, I have to tell you, if I can cut in here, I didn't know, Mark had never said anything about Alan, and Mark did not really have anything bad to say about anybody. Right. But when I told him I had made this arrangement with Joel and Alan, Mark was furious.
Yeah. And
he said all he wants is the mailing list.
Yeah.
It turns out he never did like Alan, and this kind of provoked him to explode out some of his pent up wrath. And as it turns out, I have to say, from my perspective, he was absolutely right.
He was very prescient, was Mark. I mean, the one thing I doing my own research found that there are a class of individuals that I wanted to inclined to refer to as ascended beings. Alan protested that. He said there's only one person that I would view as being an ascended being, and that was Mark Jones. Surprise!
How interesting, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, Mark really was a stellar, superior person. He became either TechSec or QualSec WW at one stage around 69 or so. So anyway, Mark and I were dear friends, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, Joel took over this free spirit, and Mark was wise. He saw what the game was, because Alan, for all of his wisdom in many ways, he was into dominating and controlling everything, and he was into being very rich. Now, Mark was never into being rich. Mark was.
But excuse me, what was the precise decision? If we could kind of encapsulate this, because I'm not sure that everybody has the intense interest that I and Norma had, because I mean we were in there with both hands trying to help them keep it going.
Well, I'm interested in the story.
Well, basically what you ran into was Joel had never done any of this before.
No.
So you ran into a guy who took it over, and in essence was an incompetent.
Yes.
Now, the next thing which I shared with Hank in 2009 at the Free Zone conference that I did a presentation as, it was the second or third time I'd run into Hank, was what happened to the original Free Spirit. When it was first published by Joel at the ranch, Alan's not much happened, and Alan's response was to kill it because it dumped on his personal lines, spiritual lines, all of those losers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Alan had what they would call a service fact computation.
Right.
He shared it with me once at a party at Tia Greenberg's when we looked at all of these people, and he took me into a back room, and in confidence he told me, "You see all of these people? They all have low havingness." And this was his excuse for doing what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I had something a little bit close to that, enough so that I could have some compassion with it. I mean, I look at a group of people or just mankind in general, and somebody pointed out that I very often said, "What's wrong with these people?"
No.
But it's kind of comparable. But I mean, if I have any complaint, it's not his strategic decision. It was the two-facedness.
Yeah.
It was the lack of integrity when it came to dealing with me, and I don't tend to make excuses for people who do that. I make excuses for people that do it to you or to Keith or to David, but when they do this to me, I tend to hang some bad luck on them.
Well, I'm all protectors. I don't know. I don't know the inner workings of between Joel and Alan, whether Joel did it on his own or whether he consulted Alan or whatever. I don't know.
No, I'm sure that was Alan's decision. Joel was trying. He just wasn't, as you said, incompetent. But
it was a whole different subject to him. Publish a magazine is like he'd never done it in his life.
Yeah, we understood that. We were willing to help him, and we actually helped him with 2 issues. And he never put out to me something that indicated that he had an alternative motive. And I was actually quite taken aback by Mark Jones's by what he said. But you know, at this point, I think we pretty much understand where he was, and as interesting as it is to me, I think we have a little agenda here, and I don't want to pull us off of it too much. I really appreciate your insight, and I have to tell you that when you told me that, it actually blew a lot of charge for me. It explained, some things that were going on, and actually enabled me to let go of it.
Well, good. A little bit of truth does come by.
Appreciate it.
Now, the decision by Alan, right or bloody wrong, is what went down. And you not understanding it, you'd have been hung up in what the hell happened.
Well, and so hopefully I'm not. So hopefully this conversation has erased the last vestiges of any kind.
I'm glad I'm to return this man to in better shape than I got him earlier.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move to Norma for a moment. something about yourself, Norma?
My background is one of the Berkeley Psychic Institute. We were aware of Scientology because we thought they didn't like us very much, and so there was a little
Really?
yeah.
Oh, you mean?
Yeah, sometimes they'd send people over and we'd spot them and escort them out. So at least that was the rumor. But the first time I heard of actually, I thought, oh my God, I'm going out with a Scientologist. Oh my God. But
didn't you tell me once that they actually spotted a group of Scientologists and rounded them up and marched them back to the Scientology organization?
as far as I can remember, it was just one person, but I don't remember.
I just...
A long time ago. But yeah, Louis Bostwick did do Scientology. He was in on the very beginning, and he was, he had a buddy and whatever those. So he learned some stuff from Ron Hubbard, which is interesting. But I have never gotten used to the meter. I do the inner track, and that's a great thing. The thing that is interesting to me is that sometimes Hank and I will work together, and I will do we'll work on passing a spirit from into the who has died or suicide or something, and we'll work on that, and I will be on the cans, but actually doing a reading as well, and in trance, and it's very helpful. It's what would you help me out here?
Well, do you want me to say it for you?
Sometimes the words don't come here.
It's I just basically use it the way I use it for anything else, to guide.
Yeah.
To guide you. I mean, you have this ability yourself, and it's easy to have an uncertainty, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Shortly you started to get into. I didn't tell you this, but I was going to ask you exactly why you never got comfortable using it, because you have been trained to use it.
You talking to Roger?
No, you.
No,
Norma.
No, I just the mechanical thing doesn't appeal to me, and I can actually use the meter, but I could never keep track of it. I could never keep the notes.
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother level. But occasionally you've had people that were just really difficult.
Yeah, well, then I use the inner track.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay.
I like the inner track. It's got colored lights. And
what's not to like? Okay. Let's see. Paul, you gave us a pretty nice description of what you do with the court system and with all these different people that you work with last time. I don't know if you want to give us a real short version of that. That would be nice.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, there's a lot of background noise, but we'll put up with it.
Okay. I currently work with clients referred by 3 judicial circuits, which is about 15 counties here in Georgia, and the courts from Florida send people up. I get them from South Carolina, and I don't know why, but I get some from Indiana. No idea why. And they're usually clients that are either one time or many times involved in family violence, domestic violence, or anger management, or normally called emotional management issues. and this has been a 10-year journey now so far with this. Before that, of course, when I first met you, Hank, I was with the Treasury Department, and I was at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center working with about 95 government agencies.
Oh, wow.
Who were being referred to me as they come through the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, or I have to go to their different sites. And at that time, there were 3 primary sites that they were working out of. So I would travel and then come back to Glencoe.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, they also had anger management issues and family violence sometimes in their situations.
Mm-hmm.
But primarily for them, it was trauma-based. So they were coming out of the military, coming into federal law enforcement. They were coming out of local law enforcement, into federal law enforcement, in federal law enforcement, and having traumatic issues or traumata. And that's when I met Hank, and it started with us at the airport. It was my initial meeting with him, and then I think at a couple of conferences I got a chance to meet him. I wound up taking later on after that a biometric program from Tyra in Kansas City, and that's what helped me working with all these people. So I hope that's a short version of where I am and where I came from.
Yeah, that's very good. I think I had asked you if you ever use the meter in forensic sessions.
I do my best to stay away from court testimony, but in that particular issue, which in forensic issues we deal with some kind of an arbitration of some kind that's going to occur after. Yes, sometimes memory recall, especially for people that are sub-threshold data that they have that needs to be able to come out. Tags, descriptions of people, classic example, description of the weapon that was pointed at the individual and started with, I remember the green ring. And from there on, the rest. And so, yes, I do that. And currently, it is dealing with rape cases, sodomization, children's issues, etc. So, yeah, but I do my best to stay away from court. That just turns into usually eating the individual up rather than just staying with what does the court need.
Yeah. Well, you get a chance to work with some interesting cases, it sounds like.
Yeah.
The only time I get people who are that interesting is pro bono, because most of these people are also impecunious. I mean, they can't pay for something or aren't willing to pay. Mostly can't, but they can't hold a job. I mean, they can't earn money. And so if you want to work with those people, you have to do it on your own nickel.
You're right. The first 4 years of doing this, everything came out of the household budget, which really my wife liked a lot.
Oh, well, there's some things I would love to talk to you about in the future, because I am still learning about some of these things, and these would also be interesting topics for future conversation. Let's go to Keith.
Yes, excuse me. Hi. Listen, there's nothing I find more boring than Scientologists chewing the fat from 30 and 40 years ago. However, I will give in to it just this once.
Hey, you and I knew it long ago.
Well, your past, whatever it is in Scientology, I actually don't know. I remember some interesting things on the bilateral meter, and I think your mother used to submit articles once in a while.
No, not my mother.
No, not your mother.
No.
There's
She
somebody
hated
else.
Scientology. I've introduced her to DMSMH, and she went apeshit. So I always thought Mr. Withhold about attempted abortion.
Well, or about something. But
Hank, can I do the talking for me?
Of course you can.
Let me tell people what I want them to know, right? Came in '64, met Roger Boswava in '66. He baptized my eldest child at '67. I went to the ship in '68, met Hubbard. And then because of family and kids. I actually had to leave the ship, went back to the UK, but I was invited to set up Manchester organization, which I began in my front room in a house. And within very few years, it's a 6-story building on the main street in Manchester. And I was CO for 5 years. Alex Siversky told me I was the longest lasting CO ever. Most of them don't last 2 years. Anyway, got busted and did my own thing. And I'm a holistic doctor. That's all you're going to hear about Scientology from me. I'm a holistic doctor. I've become internationally known. I have a following of about 160,000 people, which is probably more than Hubbard ever had at any one time, by the way. And I developed my own system of philosophy and insight that I call super noetics. Super just meaning the greatest and best, of course, and noesis or noetics. Same word as Dianetics, actually, but noetics and noesis means science or study of mind and spirit. And I'm soldier along with that, and I'm not dragging over the old models. For example, 8 dynamics is inadequate. I've got 12, which I call the channels of being. AIC triangle never performed much for me. I think it's a seriously weak definition of what I call accord, an interaction with people, and my concept of relationships and accord is quite a lot more expanded. And I actually teach from the street level upwards that we're multiple beings, we're a complex of self. And I find this history that Hubbard made such a big secret out of goes back thousands of years. The early Christian Gnostics like Vesalius and Basilides were all writing about BTs and other beings stuck to us and influencing our thoughts and so on. So I went public pretty early on. And I love the meter, and I have a strong position, which is there are certain things which I'm absolutely sure you're not going to get, or you're going to miss it if you don't have some guidance or insight. And I know there are wizard guys out there that do wonderful healing, lovely things, and they always boast, I don't need a meter. Well, to me, if you haven't got a meter, you're going to just be at a human conversation level for a lot of the time. The biggest issue we all face, Hubbard used to call it bypass charge, which I think is a silly term, but indirect or latent charge anyway, which when it's stimulated, the person has not the faintest idea where it's coming from. How are you going to find out without a meter? We've all seen situations of people screaming their head off, throwing furniture, and if you can just make them hold the cans or hold their hands in contact with the cans if you have to, the minute you spot the bypass charge, it all calms, the person heals, the wounds go away. That is just magic. It's wonderful to see. And I wouldn't give that up for anything. So I consider the meter very valuable indeed in certain situations. I mean, you know, a beginner, it's fine to just say, oh, you know, remember a time when, you know, things weren't so good, you know, let's go back there and so on. But for actually handling bypass charge and assessing lists, which incidentally I call structured conversations. You know, you have the structures are the questions, you know, the buttons or the items or questions. So I've invented a lot of new terminology. Some of it deserves new terminology. Some of it is just to disguise anyone else's authorship. So I don't use bypass charge because you've only got to Google that and they'll say, hey, you're a Scientologist. Now, I can't afford to have that happen. As an internationally known published MD with about 25 books. I am actually on the web, but, you know, I don't want it known, and it tends to be not known. Very few people ever seemingly make the connection. So that's my view. It's probably all my contribution, but I'll enjoy the rest of the conversation. I'll pick it up if I hear something I definitely want to comment on. Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Keith. And I'd like to add, if I may, we've been privileged to know Keith for quite a long time. He's amazingly prolific as a writer, and I admire that a great deal, and I must say envy it a bit. And he's always checking about, you know, discovering alternative treatments and writing up about them. And the gentleman has a lot of integrity. And so as much stuff as I get from him online in emails and announcements, I tend to open everything and scan through it. Some of the stuff is very interesting. So
Thank you.
thank you for being there. I'd like to start with my own position on the meter. I'll start with a little anecdote.
Excuse me, have you checked with David Pelly?
David Pellet. David, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I skipped you. Yeah, please let us know. Let us know about you. Thank you, Norma.
Well, I started out in a personal search for who I was. I was very dysfunctional as a child. When I was 15 years old, I was so dysfunctional, I didn't know if I was coming or going. I began to do research, and I just kept on reading hundreds of books till I gave up in 1997, and I was going to commit suicide on Good Friday of '97, and I didn't want to, but I tried everything. Nothing worked. I tried all kinds of religion and New Age stuff for healing, and I was really bad shape. And I turned the TV on at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I caught a Dynetics commercial. And I said, "Oh my God, another book!" But it's the source of all your troubles, and read page such and such. So I happened to have a copy. Long story short, and I pulled it and I got into it. It was difficult to read for a while for me. But then I got into it, and it said, it was the first book that ever made any sense about problems of the mind and about life. So I read all day Friday and Saturday, and when I got Saturday night, I said, I got to find out more about this. And somehow I found the number and happened to be the Toronto, Oregon. I called there, and I asked, I want more information. He said, "You want to come in for a demo?" I didn't even know what a demo was, but I said, "I'll take one." He said, "Well, when can you be in?" I said, "I got to be in there tomorrow for noon." Okay, so I was there for noon, and the guy that was supposed to do the demo didn't show up, or he didn't. They found another young guy from Wise, Dynetics auditor. Amazing Dynetics auditor. Gave me an amazing session, 2.5 hours. It was probably the one of them. Well, I've had a few great sessions in my life, but it was super good. I went. He found an incident where my dad beat me so much he almost killed me when I was 4 years old. That was my basic ruin. But the session was so good, I went clear after that for about an hour. It was just right up. Amazing. And then I was hooked. And it wasn't long after that I found out that the church was just an asylum. And a few days went by. I did a few courses. But during the time I was there, I seen this place was just cuckoo. And I basically told them that. And they basically threw me out. So I may hold the record for the shortest time in Scientology before getting declared. Anyways, I saw the data was just amazing because I did the courses. I was just flying. And I thought this is the greatest thing. But I asked them, how come this stuff was so good and you guys, I said to them, how can you guys work so hard to make such a mess of such a good thing? And there's no answer for that. And then they showed me a video of Miscavige and what I thought of him. And I told them I think there's something wrong with him. And
really?
That was pretty well the downfall. A few days later, I was on the meter and sec checked, and then I asked the old guy, well, how come he shut the fuck up? And he basically blew up, and that's when I got declared. So anyways, on the way out, they sold me 4 home study courses, Dynetics, Science of Survival, uh, intro to Scientology ethics and PTSSP. I was glad to buy them. I knew the data was good. I just no problem at all. Bought them, took them home, and I spent all summer. I spent in bed, couldn't do anything else, and I did each course 3 times over.
Wow.
And I had a down pat, and then I happened to go to a conference in San Antonio, and I met somebody there that told me about the Free Spirit Journal. And long story short, he gave me his copy, and I connected with. I read it, and I saw a whole bunch of ads for auditing, including Rogers. I remember I called Roger, asking for auditing, Roger Buswara, and Roger told me he's charging $350 an hour for auditing. Well, that was out of my range.
When was that, David? I don't remember that.
1997.
Oh.
And so anyways, I hooked up with Bob Ross, and Bob was amazing. And I got a bunch of auditing from him, and I got after 2 sessions, my feet grew 2 sizes, and I grew 1.5 inches.
Wow.
Because my growth was stunted from the beatings. My dad almost killed me. I was half dead, or 3/4 dead, actually, maybe more. But anyways, from then on, I just kept on plugging away. Bob finally broke the auditor's code, and I couldn't get back into session with him. Then I went to Robert Ducharme, and for 8 years, off and on, Robert Ducharme was very good overall. Not great auditing, but very persistent. Eager to help. I had some very good wins with him.
Yeah.
And
Well,
more.
I think.
I got all the Free Spirit Journal copies from Hank, from all the back issues, and made up took all the tech articles out and made up a nice binder for myself. So that's kind of like my bridge.
Fantastic.
Wow. I don't have a meter. I'm not trained on the meter. I like being on the meter. But I've had lots of auditing off the meter.
Mm-hmm.
I've had about 400 hours of auditing already, and I think I've learned to audit with Bob Ross's process. I think it's fantastic. So that's kind of a rough overview.
Well, thank you very, very much, David. It's
David, this is Keith. Can I ask you a question before you go? Well, we're not going, but you know what I mean. What you said was like one of those interesting, impossible physiological things. Like, decades later, you catch up on your growth. But being the MD I am, I'm interested. I don't say, well, that's bullshit. It couldn't possibly have happened. Obviously, it happened. So I'd like to talk to you a bit more in depth about it. Would you be willing after this call? I don't mean like right now today, but if Hank connects us, would you answer a few questions by email, that kind of thing?
No problem. I'd love to. I mean, oh, did I crash?
Something crashed, yeah.
Probably.
I don't know whose screen it is, but something went.
It's me. I'm trying to find the right connection to get my video up.
Yeah, you're sharing your screen here.
Okay, that's
you hit the share screen, and would you go back down to the share screen and exit that? Okay, let's see. I might be able to control that myself. Original size.
Oh, jeez. I'm going to drop out and enter again.
Okay, that.
Maybe things will turn out better. Okay.
Sure, you might even have your camera working.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay. So this has never happened before. There we go. We're back to what I'm used to. So we'll see you shortly, David.
Yep.
And
We lost a few heads.
what's his George? Is George? Where are you, George? George.
George vanished by the looks of it. Rasmussen.
I don't know what happened to George.
He was next to you.
I didn't acknowledge that I had skipped him, so I hope he didn't get upset with that.
I forgot to say an interesting point. I just want a couple sentences. Late in the fall, when I got another Free Spirit Journal, I saw Mark Jones's ad for all his books. I called him up. We talked for a couple hours, twice for a couple hours, I think. And I bought all his books, huge box. I paid $800 for them, all the original set. Some amazing stuff in there, and that's my bridge.
Yeah, fantastic. Does anybody have a phone number for George Rasmussen?
I don't even have an email, so.
I have an email for him.
You want me to email him?
Yes. Let's see. Give me a second. I might actually be able to find that. Last name Rasmussen. Rasmussen. I do have something here. Give me just a moment. Norma?
Yes.
Would you be so kind as to call him? I have a phone number here.
Yeah, why don't you text it to me? Chat window.
Okay, copy. Coming back here. Hide panorama. Magic. Norma to Norma Novi. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. If you would, indicate that we were typing each other about it, but I didn't announce it or acknowledge it to him. So anyhow, we are actually, except for 4-8, yeah, except for George. I don't know what happened to George, but let me tell you a little bit of how I got involved with the meter and the kind of impact it made on me. Sometime in the late 60s or very early 70s in New York, I was a guitar maker and repairman on St. Mark's Place in New York. And we had a friend that used to come around. My girlfriend and I had a friend. I've forgotten, I've just forgotten his name for the moment. But he was a poet and a classical guitarist, and he would come over in the evening and he would recite poetry and play classic guitar for us. And he always overstayed his welcome. I mean, he never knew when it was time to go, and we'd eventually have to excuse ourselves and basically throw him out. But he was a friend, and he would always be telling me about this the self-help group that he was involved with, and there's George. Welcome back, George. So he would tell me about this self-help group uptown, and first of all, I wasn't going to take his suggestion for self-help group because I considered he was a pretty messed up guy, and So one day he got up at a very appropriate time, maybe it was 9:30, and said, "Okay, I'm going to excuse myself now and let you guys, have some privacy and go to bed." And he started walking out, and oh God, I just wish I knew his name. And I said, wait a minute, come back here. What changed? I mean, we always have to throw you out of here, and you're very considerate. I said, what's going on in your life? And he says, well, it's this stuff I'm telling you about. There's this guy up on what's it, 77th Street or 79th Street, Gene Hobel, 96th Street actually was. And I want you to come and see him, and because I mean it's changed things a lot for me. So I allowed myself to be dragged up there. And Gene was an amazing speaker. He was very funny. I didn't know it at the time, but he was very spontaneous and fun to listen to. And I asked him later, how did you get like this? How did you become so free and able to go into different personalities? And he told me, well, it's all Scientology. It's Hubbard stuff. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was an improv coach. He and his wife taught theater improv, and they probably were doing this for years. But he was promoting, Scientology, and he did a lecture which I found very interesting, and most of it made sense to me. I looked around. I didn't like most of the people there. They were kind of forced happy, great big eyes, like they're trying to confront, and kind of like true believers. They kind of reminded me of Hare Krishna people, and but he demonstrated this meter, and I saw this meter, and I told myself, I may not be able to get along with these people, and I may not be able to be here, but I'm going to have this meter. This meter, I have to have this. I never saw anything like this in college in psychology. I had no idea that such a thing existed, and I saw all the possibilities. And that was my first contact with the meter. And of course, my postulate must have come quite true, because I've built thousands of meters. I've had so many. I've got so many meters under my desk now that it's just. It was the most attractive thing initially to me about the whole involvement. The meter is a solution to a particular problem. And the problem is that people don't normally know what they're thinking. Thoughts are real things. And in my book, I put out an analogy that the mind is like the computer's central processing unit, CPU. And consciousness is like the computer screen. So most people work with, even New Age people and spiritual people, they work with this idea of a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, two minds. In Scientology, they have the reactive mind. The reactive mind is the mind that has all the screw-ups in it. That's like having a computer with a special folder where you keep all the bugs that screw up the computer. This is stupid. You don't have a folder for bugs on your computer. What makes them bugs is they're all mixed in with the good stuff. There's just a mind. It's an assemblage of pictures and functions that you use to accomplish things. It's like a giant computer program, like PageMaker or something. It's actually composed of many other programs, dictionaries, graphic stuff, and it works until something happens where you look for something that you knew you created You can't find it. You can't find it on your computer. You can't access it. In other words, you can't get it up on the computer monitor. So it's like, you know, I wrote my novel, now it's on the computer. I can't find my novel. What happened to it? And this is what happens with the mind. This is what goes wrong with the mind. It's an issue about accessibility. Consciousness is just the ability. It's not a place or an entity in itself, you know, like the supermind and the overmind and the undermind and the conscious mind and the reactive. It's not like that. It's just the ability to access what's going on down there in all of the thoughts and thought processes. And the nice thing about the meter is it allows you to go down there and get stuff and put it up on the screen. You can't erase it unless you can see it. You can't modify it unless you can see it. So that's the use of the meter. And I find this almost indispensable. Not completely. I've run a lot of sessions without meters. I did a lady in Tasmania recently who had actually had a long history in Scientology, and she called me, and I worked with her without a meter, and I turned her life around. We're very proud of what happened, and very happy for her. Didn't need a meter. Of course, she took a lot of responsibility herself because of her own background, but it never became an issue that I asked her to look for something and she couldn't find it. But that's the normal condition. You know, do you have an upset? No.
Warm for me.
You know, and you say, do you have an upset? And you see a big read on the meter, and they say, no. Well, when I say there's a read on the, you know, when I say upset, you get this read. What do you suppose that is? And I don't know. I don't think I have an upset. And he said, well, what's that? What's that? You put them on a scan, and you can actually steer them and narrow it. And this takes a whole 15 seconds. In a psychologist's office, even if he's good, even if he's sharp and asks the right questions, he might take an hour to do this. You do it in about 15 seconds. You know, what's not to like about this? There is there's an analogy here. I don't know if anybody flies an airplane. I've flown for a long time, and I've recently got back into it. There are a couple of instruments that you use in an airplane. These I've recently taken out of the airplane. What this is, you notice, this is a gyro compass. Okay, you notice that thing in here is a compass, but it doesn't work magnetically. You set this in the airplane to the magnetic compass. The magnetic compass is very squirrely. It reads differently when you accelerate, when you decelerate, when you turn. You can fly past a mountain literally with a lot of mineral content, and your magnetic compass will point at the mountain. It's very difficult to use, and well, you know, you could fly without even the magnetic compass. You look around, you see where you are, you know where you're going. Who needs a compass? And who needs a gyro compass? But if you're flying at night, it's really easy to get lost. If you're flying in unfamiliar territory or over wilderness, it's really easy to get lost. And that can be very consequential. You can run out of fuel. You go down, you fall down, go boom. So you really need to know where you're going. I have flown without. When I bought our last airplane, this thing wasn't working. And this is it. So I was flying without it. The other thing I was flying without is this. This is an airspeed indicator. This tells you how fast you're going. What's the significance of that? If you're not going fast enough, the plane stops flying and falls out of the sky. Go boom. So you've got to know that you're keeping it going. You've got to know that you're going over 50 miles an hour or something. And if you're turning, you've got to be going even faster. Because if one wing stops flying and the other one's still flying, the plane turns over. This is very easy to have it happen. Well, when I got the plane, this wasn't working either. So I was flying the plane around for a few weeks without these things, just on the basis of experience. I have enough experience, I can kind of tell from the sound and from my peripheral vision, I can kind of tell how fast the plane is going. If I don't lose track of the highways down there, and the time of day and stuff, I can kind of tell what direction I'm going, and I don't get lost and get back to the airport. But why do it? Why do it? Especially if you're going cross country from one town to another, 100 miles away. Why would you do this without this gadget that costs a couple of $100, a few $100? It doesn't make sense to me. So I've been in sessions that were like this, where I have pretty good intuition. I mean, I think I have as good intuition as anybody who claims to not need a meter. But maybe 10, 15% of the time, I'm wrong. And if I can catch myself in an error without anybody knowing about it, I mean, I say, whoops, I asked this question, I didn't get any reaction from it, I'm barking up a wrong tree, and just ask another question. I don't tell the client, well, that doesn't read, so I must have asked the wrong question. I don't do that. You talk to the person and you can see what has charge on it, suppressed charge, bypass charge, unconscious suppressed charge. The words don't mean anything. All these things are semantic. Basically, what you're talking about is a thought that has significance because it impacts the guy's feelings and his behavior, and he don't know what it is. He may not even know it's there. Okay, so you're dealing. This is what we do. This is our stock and trade. If you don't have a way to detect it, well, it's an interesting demonstration that you can actually spot these things without without instrumentation. It's an interesting demonstration. It's a validation of my own abilities. But I don't expect my client to have those abilities. And sometimes I can turn a meter around and show it to the client and show him, when I ask you if you've got a discreditable secret or something you feel embarrassed about, I'm getting this big read here. Like when I ask you if you have a withhold, you see that big read there? I'm going to ask you what it is, and you find it. And he's looking at it. He can't say, well, there's nothing there, because I say withhold, and it reads. Withhold, it reads. Okay, now you tell me what it is, and when you find it yourself, it'll read that same read. Okay, do it yourself. and that makes him responsible for apprehending his own thoughts. We don't have very much in our culture that teaches people. You really should learn this as a child, that it's commendable to spot a thought that you might not easily see. You see? We do that when we try to remember the name of a movie star that we've forgotten, or remember somebody's name. You go out on a date and realize you forgot the girl's name, and what do? It's embarrassing to ask her, so you're sitting there trying to find these things. This is getting, how do you get the stuff up on the monitor so you can work with it? That's what the meter is for. And I'm curious why people don't like the meters. There are a lot of people don't like meters, and some people do this work professionally. And I have my own ideas why they don't like them, but I'd like to find out. I know, David, you wrote to me and said that you prefer not to work with a meter.
So I never said that. I said,
No?
I don't mind. I've done lots of it.
I'm sorry, George. I think I corresponded with George recently.
Yes, that's right. And I don't use a meter, and I've not used a meter in the last 15 years. On my own solo auditing, I feel much closer to what I'm doing, more at cause over whatever subject matter I'm dealing with, without the intermediary of the meter, without the translation aspects of the meter, without an electrical charge of 6 volts going through my body and its disturbance indicating that there's a thought there. Well, where I'm going, I just felt as though I got past it. Now, I'm a grad 5 auditor. I've done Golden Age of Tech more recently, and I've done everything on a CS Series 53. DCSIs, end of endless, I've done it all. And at HTC quality. And I am happy to not use a meter.
Mm-hmm. Is that something?
I ran into Pete about 15 years ago, Zivarod. And one of my good friends is Mike Goldstein. And Mike Goldstein doesn't use a meter. And I've had all of Identics. And a lot of people I know have gone through his shop there in Colorado. We used to be flag banking officers way back.
Two things. Could you explain again very briefly what is Pete and who is
PEAT is from Zivorod Slavinsky. He's a Croatian. He published it in English back in 2002, 2003. It's a book on a therapy technique, and he's been around. He quotes Hubbard and David Mayo and Captain Bill Robertson and John Galusha. These are all people that he is drawn from. A.C. Walters, the whole bunch, as well as historical sources. And he's got quite a following over there in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I understand that. And he doesn't use a meter.
No. And my better half.
Why does Mike Galusha not use a meter?
Well, he's dead. That's a good reason, right there.
No, not Galusha. I meant his partner, Michael
Goldstein.
Mike Goldstein.
Yeah. He doesn't need it. You don't need it. We don't have that kind of search and find out technique that you were just describing. We are not approaching the mind the way you are. And not just, I'm not dumping on you. I'm just saying we're doing it in a different way. And we don't need a meter to do it.
Got that. Okay.
And I do Captain Bill stuff, and I don't need a meter. I do, I address fantastic spiritual constructions from Superpower, OT12, stuff like that. I admit it's tricky, but you don't need a meter. It's you and your experience right there. It's you, reality, and I don't want anything in between.
Thank you. Norma.
That seems to be all solo, though. Was it, George? Solo processing, where you don't use the meter?
What was that, Roger?
Sorry, mate. That was you doing solo processing yourself. You're not needing a meter.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. When you're working with another, a meter can be quite helpful.
And my partner here, Fluffy, she was introduced to Pete. I introduced her, and with Karen Gould down in Texas, and she's been using it. We went to Sivarod's seminars when he came to Kentucky, and we did a training with her, and it was all unmetered. And Fluffy is taking in clients for free because we don't charge. We've never charged. We're not practitioners, really. And she just does just fine without a meter, and causes some real life-changing events. And they don't know what happened. They don't know. They walk off. Whatever big horrible problem they had, it's gone.
Mhm.
No meter.
Right. Got it. Got that. Thank you. And let me ask Norma. You don't use a meter normally. I
That's
mean,
correct.
you will use a biomonitor in a pinch, or you use it when you're working with me. Why have you not started using it, or why have you not been using it for yourself?
Well, I have a way of going into trance and seeing different things in people's space, and usually it's in their aura, chakras, or that sort of thing. And it actually see a shape, and as I ask about the person to focus on the shape, they seem to get it. I mean, they're there, they're focused on it, and they start talking, and I just guide them to wherever the shape has me go. I mean, if it's decreasing, then I'm and changing, then I'm saying, oh, okay, we're on something, and she's touched it, or he. If it is not, if it's just, nothing is happening, then I will say nothing, nothing's happening.
Yeah.
That's pretty smart.
It's just like, we're not on it. Please think, or I'll guide them. Sometimes I get what year something significant has happened. Like, okay, when you were 21, what happened? And they'll think, oh, well, let's see, nothing really. But then, eventually they go, oh, yeah, that happened. Oh, right. So, and then that'll be an entry point. So that's kind of the way I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's some good luck with that. I usually work with women. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It certainly does.
Well,
And
particularly if you've got good perception like that, Norma, that's a real winner.
mhm.
It really does. It's above using the mechanics of a meter. I personally find I use a meter all the time, personally in solo sessions and when I work with others, because Hubbard put too much complexity and bullshit on the meter.
Yeah,
It's a simple instrument, really. It made it
I think so.
and became a really barrier to comprehending it. It's a simple little thing. It does register when there is something going on when you approach the mind. Now you can follow up on it if your technical training indicates that it's worth following up on, or you can bloody ignore it. It doesn't matter. But you as a processor, whether it's solo or processing another, your perception is seen. However, there are occasions when you get into really occluded areas where it's all muddy that you can use the meter to pick up what is responding that you can then address to solve the issue that's blocked.
Yeah.
That's the only time really you need a meter, when something is really difficult.
Yeah. There was a point that a few years ago, just about the time that I think a little bit before the time I met Norma, I became very fascinated with the potentialities of the meter. I also became particularly interested in channeling, and I had already always been kind of interested in that, but one of the things that I discovered was that a rising needle indicates resistance to something.
Mhm.
And there was a group of people, Frank and Jane Samuelson used to hold every month these get-togethers for old timers. And most of these people wanted each other's company, but they did not want anything to do with Scientology. And so we would go there and we would have brunch, and somebody would get up and talk about something, and somebody was doing some kind of healing or another. And I brought the meter with a friend I had been working with, and based on what we had discovered ourselves, one of the things that we found that people resist is undelivered or unwanted communication. So I would go around to these people who, ask them to hold the meter, and they were expecting some kind of process or something. I don't do this sort of thing. But I would just ask them this simple question. Almost all of these people had a very high range, or TA, like 5.5. Now, these are all the enlightened people. These are people with years of sessions and meditation and highly evolved people. They're certainly nice to talk to, and they all had real high. And I would ask them, do you ever get the feeling somebody's trying to talk to you? And I get these 2 division blowdowns. What the hell is that? Well, it's exactly what you would think. These people have God knows who trying to communicate with them, ex-wives, people who died in the house they're living in, ancestors. Who knows? It could be anybody. And they have no context for dealing with it, except with the OT level, who doesn't teach you anything. And they're trying to go like this. Don't go on. Stop it, And they're going through life like this. And that's what they're really doing. And so the TA goes up to the top, and if you indicate it, that touches on it, and suddenly there's all this energy that bleeds off for a moment. Well, you could use that same phenomenon for finding out who's talking to them, how long they've been there, what do they want to do now, and usually, but not always, they think that they're trying to help. But to sit there and guess that, why guess it? You just talk to them, just ask them. There could be a number of them. Where you just have them stand in line and you talk to the one that seems to be most urgent or most pressing. So this was always fascinating to me. Anyhow, there was another thing on that, but I can't remember what it was. It disappeared down into the CPU and I can't access it. What was I going to talk about? George, that's what I was.
Yes.
Yeah. What's been your idea about why people don't use a meter?
Generally, they're using a technique that is different from that of the practitioner and a client. Warrior and Freud with a patient. The medical way of doing things for well over 100 years has been find out what's wrong with the person, what's causing the symptoms, and locate that and cure it. And I don't look at things that way. And I hear stories about wanting to find out who is trying to talk to this person that's on the meter, and you're getting LFBDs and all this. And I quite frankly don't care. I don't care about that if I'm talking to somebody.
Well, that's fair enough.
Earth is what Earth is. I don't think people in Scientology have been particularly honest in describing the situation here on this planet. And I'm not just talking about Incident 2. I'm not going to go any further into that. But I mean, since then, I mean, this whole situation here. And what we need techniques that people can use as self-help. Self-help, because I think the model of the highly paid practitioner ain't working. And if people want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, good.
Well,
I look back at DMSMH. And
this is a good point. You know, you don't really need the practitioner client model, but the thing about the practitioner client model, the way it helps me is, if I'm doing a session on someone, I'm there for them. I'm not there for me. I don't have reactions. They had a kind of a crude way to put this in the church. There's no case on post. In other words, when you're there to do something, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have any vulnerabilities. There's a famous Australian psychic healer, and I've forgotten his name, came and visited Tim and Suzanne, and he would lay people on a table, a massage table on their back, and run his hands over them, and he'd find areas where they had chronic illness.
Right.
He'd get rid of it like that. And he actually had other people do it. It was a workshop, and people came and did this with each other. It's amazing. People could actually perceive these things accurately. And someone asked him, well, what about cancer? Aren't you worried that if somebody has cancer and you go and you're handling this stuff on a thought basis, that you could possibly get cancer? And he said, if you have any thought about that, you can't do this work.
Okay, well, I'll give you a counter story. There was a fellow called Doc Garrison, and he was an original 1950 Dianeticist. He never got into Scientology from spring of 52 onwards, never used a knee meter, not ever. And he had a chiropractic practice and in North Hollywood, California, when I was out there in the Sea Org and all that. And I went and visited him with another friend, and he didn't know me from Adam. I'm wearing long sleeve shirt, long pants. Okay, there were several clients there in the room. He's got his table set up. He says, who wants to be first? So I stood up. He looked me up and down. He told me where I had broken my bones and approximately how long ago. I've got 10 broken bones in my body from various accidents over time. And he laid me down and handled some sprung ribs that I had from a fall several years before. Mm-hmm. And I was flabbergasted. This is what I had been told he could do, and I was very impressed.
Sure. Well, wonderful. He had that talent, that gift, and I'm sure he worked hard too. People have been doing healings like this.
It's a skill that you regenerate, that you reacquire.
Well,
How do
people have been doing healings like this since time immemorial. The meter does not go back much before 1945, and it didn't approach its current form until just before 1950. So it's been with us very, very recently. Yet there have been people that could heal others remotely or presently by laying hands on them. Most churches, before they became what they are today, were places where people could go to heal. So it was not considered outrageous. Nobody was concerned that the priest wasn't being scientific, you know. And this is
think that
a recent development where you have the Catholic Church has actually an impressive amount of literature and the technology on casting out unwanted beings, demons, whatever they call them, and yet a priest is forbidden to use any of that stuff because it would bring discredit to the church. And
yeah,
this
they
is
have a very
recent
strict on
development.
that. There's a priest down in Argentina right now who's doing a lot of exorcisms, and there was a article that today in one of the UK papers about it. I talked to the Ronzord people that I know down in Buenos Aires about this sort of thing. We're in constant communication. Fine. People do that. Bob Larson is an American Christian, and he's not Catholic, and he does quite a few successful exorcisms.
Yeah.
He's careful to say that he does a lot of work prior to the exorcism to identify whether the complaint is from some other cause, because there could be great legal troubles if you go crazy, as sometimes people.
Well, yeah. Well, you can't. If you worry about legality, you won't touch any of this stuff. I understand in Pennsylvania. I don't know if it's still there, but I think it is. You cannot tell a person to visualize something unless you're a psychologist. I mean, this is you worry about legality. You can't do anything. Something that I remembered. I suppressed it when I just started discovering all of these things. It's like a gate opened up, and that was actually rather recently. That was about the time that I took over the Free Spirit Journal, and I went to Mark Jones, and I showed him these interesting things with the meter, you know, about the undelivered communication. And he confided to me, he said, you know, I used to love the meter. I worked with it very easily until I took the Class 8 course. And by the time I was done with that course, I never wanted to see a meter again.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because there was so much duress, so much punishment, so much fear, and so much invalidation connected with the stupid meter that he just never wanted to see it again. Well, that's like somebody you know, beats you with an alarm clock. Here's an alarm clock, right? I've got this alarm clock. Okay, here I'm going to show you all about the alarm clock and teach you to use it. Bang, 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 bang. You know, until you never want to see an alarm clock again. And what does that have to do with the alarm clock? What does that have to do with the ability to have this on your desk and glance at it once in a while and say, oh, no, no, no. I'm developing my own intuitive ability to tell the time. I don't need an alarm clock. I think that's what they accomplished on the Class 8 course, certainly for Mark Jones.
Yeah, they made the meter superior to your perception and the client perception, and it all went south at that point.
Yeah.
Because that, by the way, was when standard tech really got hammered in. And everything else got invalidated. And your native perception and abilities to communicate and perceive another, like Norma was saying, she perceives. Well,
Totally overridden.
why would you ever want to invalidate that and put a stupid piece of equipment in the way? Hey, Norma?
Yeah.
Yes.
Here, Roger. Here.
But it's like an alarm clock. I got this sitting on my desk. I forget that it's even there, but I have it there. Look at that.
But I'll tell you what, Hank, on the meter thing, there is a read that Hubbard never ever utilized. Of course, the bastard was never really into helping people. He was into, making his money.
Mm.
But there is a meter read, which is very important, which is not discussed in any of the tech. And I was doing solar knots for nearly 12 years, stupidly, because I didn't know any better.
Uh-huh.
And I kept quite often getting what's called these reversed rocket reads.
Yeah.
Right? And a rocket read does a big explosive.
Big fall, yeah.
Yeah, but it's explosive, and it diminishes as the charge bleeds off the fall. But a reverse rocket read is the reverse of that. And what I eventually found out, I was wondering, what the hell is this? I mean, it was punishing my head. It turned out that there's this massive reverse vector, anti-life, anti all of your spiritual qualities, anti, criminal anti of your spirituality, which is so instant that it causes this explosive addition of life force.
Yeah. It's very interesting. You're describing something I describe in my book.
You're so clever.
I couch it a little bit differently. I mean, it's not an identical concept, but awfully close. And I just call it a reverse fall.
Yeah, well, it explodes up.
A reverse fall, the explosiveness is interesting, but when you get a definite fall, I don't mean a rise, but a propelled fall, that's when a person contacts something that is ganz schrecklich, that is completely terrible. It's like a guy is looking at a porn flick and suddenly recognizes his 16-year-old daughter
in the flick.
In the flick. That would give you that kind of read. Yeah.
Well, there's another addition to that. That's correct on the rise read.
Uh-huh.
Going back into 62, 63, when we're dealing with own goals GPMs, long tech, cause lots of damages and shit like that. But basically, what we learned in those days, that a rocket read is your own posture, your own, spiritual explosive cause to bring about a new condition. Well, the reverse of that obviously is a negative of that, which is what the reverse rocket read is. So when one gets too complex in these meters, and I know Norma doesn't like this because it gets bloody complicated. I mean, who needs all this shit? Except on occasion it's helpful. And if you can really read a meter and know what's behind the characteristics of each read, you can really unlock the real locked up encysted life force that has trapped us here and also in the physical universe.
Yeah.
So that's a topic for another big conversation.
It is. Well, there's yet another read, one more read, that is not acknowledged anywhere on the bridge.
Yeah.
It looks like a dirty needle, but it just barely jiggles.
Yeah.
It looks like it could almost be an electronic interference.
Yeah.
A dirty needle is jagged. This is like this. And that is someone's talking. It's a communication read.
I better look for them.
Yeah. And I discovered this working with channels. because we've got some being that's in communication, and we ask it a question, and instead of just having a short answer, it has a long description. I mean, they're explaining a whole electronic processor. They're giving you this information, and you'll see this happen while they're talking. And then it'll stop, and the person will tell you what was said, and then you'll see this again. So there's more of it, and oh yes, he left out this part here. This has been invaluable for me, and it's not something you usually use in therapy.
Right.
It's if you see it, you know what it is, and you can lead up to it with intelligent questions.
Right.
But I've also worked with a very well-known Michael channel. I don't know if you have ever been involved with Michael teachings, messages from Michael. This is a kind of a group entity that comes through to a number of people, and it's recognizable no matter whom it comes through. And this is fascinating. I think many years ago, a bunch of monks all over, Christian monks, all over Africa and all over the Mediterranean area, they would write stuff and describe and ascribe it to the Hermetica or to Horus. And these guys could not have known each other, and they were doing it kind of simultaneously, and this information was coming through them. And the Michael teachings are a little bit like that. Anyhow, I had a guy who was a proponent of this, and his wife was actually the main channel. That was BP Van Hull.
Oh, right.
And her husband's name was Christian. Christian came to my office once, and I asked him to do a channel session. And the guy, he was a little bit uptight, normal meter. And when he was channeling, it was just a complete big, even floating needle.
Mm.
That was fascinating.
Mm.
So anyhow,
have you done JZ Knight?
Say that again.
Have you met JZ Knight?
JC Knight, I did see her. I saw her in Washington, where I think she was in Washington, Olympia or something. I was not a proponent of hers, but I did go with a friend and see her, and what she had to say was not engaging to me. I mean, the fact that something is channeled does not in itself make it really interesting to me. A lot of stuff is channeled. People can develop a relationship with a being or a group of beings that gives them information. And I think that sometimes we do this in theater improv. I think somebody like Robin Williams had a whole committee of people. He had a whole staff that would come in there and just express themselves through him in sometimes the most outrageous ways.
You met Robin Williams?
Yeah. Have I met him? No, not personally. I feel like I have. A lot of people felt that because he was not a secretive person. I mean, he wore his beingness on his sleeve. When he talked to you, you were looking way down into the depths. He didn't hold anything back. and he was a very sweet person, but he could channel some crazy stuff. And
Crazy in what way?
Hmm?
Crazy in what way? Why crazy?
Ridiculous, outrageous,
Oh,
impersonations, mannerisms. He could come up with situations that were just, I mean, he was the ultimate improv actor. And fortunately for me, that's what Gene Hobel was, because I'll tell you, if the first person I had met at that center was David Mayo,
oh,
um, or even what was his name, the British guy, supposedly the first clear, John
no, my master.
John McMaster. John McMaster was a sweetheart. He was an amazing person.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw him field an extremely hostile interview on television, and he just kept the guy laughing.
Yeah,
And the
he
guy,
just loved them in the silence.
yeah. Well, the guy said, "John, I can't seem to get you upset." And he was supposed to be attacking John, and he couldn't. So I appreciated John, but that's not the same thing.
Right.
These people actually go into different personalities. They shapeshift.
Yeah.
You know, Jonathan Winters had some of that too.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's what got me involved. The idea that somebody could change who they were right in front of you. This was like, to me, like watching somebody levitate. And boy, I wanted that so badly. You know, I wanted that. That was, to me, that was much more important than getting rid of the anguish from a bad childhood, or getting rid of a chronic disease. Or I just wanted to be able to change colors like that. Wow, right in front of you.
Hank, you've actually expressed what was a major change in the history of Scientology. In the early days, people were interested into expansion, getting better and acquiring more abilities.
Mm.
But around 1965, it all bloody changed when Hubbard developed the dissemination formula, and it all became a proposition of find out what is wrong that had to be fixed.
I use that to disseminate.
Alma got that. Huh? What? Say again?
Oh, somebody said something. I used that. I used that formula. The fact is,
Well, it's a valid formula, except that it changed the whole complexion.
Well,
the early days we're all into getting better, expansion, developing abilities, helping society, and yep. And then suddenly it became an issue of helping people fix what's wrong with them.
Well, it's a good marketing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying that in another realm here. I've got a website going on to help people who have a particular issue. Most people are actually quite miserable. Most people are
You ask them, you do a polling survey. Are you happy doing what you're doing with your job, with your family, whatnot? Are you happy where you are, the kind of house you have, living in this town as opposed to some ritzy area? Are you happy being who you are? And most everybody ain't. They want to change. They want to do something else, whatever it is. And they follow stars in Hollywood, and they think their lives must be so much better, so much more glamorous. They seem to have so much more money, go shopping all the time. Yeah, that must be great.
Okay, what's the point here?
They're unhappy with who they are, where they are, doing what they're doing. And you play on that, and yeah, you can make $1 out of it.
Yeah, and people are unhappy with the voices in their heads. People are unhappy
just
because
about everybody here on Earth, the human being, is guilty of something, and they deserve being here.
Here's okay. It's one way to look at it. Who you can blame them. But here's my take on why people are unhappy. They do not know the basics of what a thought is.
Right.
They don't know the difference between themselves and this big monkey here.
Right.
They identify with it. They have no suspicion, not the vaguest suspicion. Even very religious people, they don't have the vaguest suspicion that they are immortal. They don't,
Right.
unless they have a near-death experience, and then God knows, they're lucky if they see Jesus or something. And they don't know what an upset is. They don't know the components of an upset. They walk around pissed. Even Scientologists.
Yep.
Do you have an ARC break? I don't have an ARC break. I'm a grade 2 release. Okay. Are you pissed about something? Oh, hell yeah. What's that? And they're frustrated. They don't know the anatomy of a frustration. And the frustration is an emotional result of a situation where you have a desire, a wish, a postulate, and you simultaneously have another one, and they preclude each other, and they don't know this. Nobody teaches you this. They teach them how to solve the problems. People don't know that when they have a discreditable secret that they must make sure nobody finds out about, it screws them up. Yeah. It makes them withdrawn. It makes them shy. And if somebody nearly finds out about it, makes them act like assholes. Yeah. It makes them critical and terrible. You can't. You know, how can you have a relationship with another person for more than a few months if you don't understand that phenomenon? Because it affects all of us. And people walk around afraid, and they have no idea. They could say, well, I'm afraid of men because I was raped once. Well, are you being raped now? No, but what's going on? Well, they're holding on to this picture. They can't get into present time. Some of their attention is back there. And another thing that they don't understand is that as beings, they can move around in time and space. Okay, look in your adjacent room. How many knobs are on your dresser? You know, you have an amplifier there. Name all the knobs on your amplifier without looking. They don't know that they can do that. You know, go back to your 5th birthday. How many people were at your party? I can't remember that. I don't store that stuff. Of course you don't store it. You don't remember things by storing them up. You remember things by going back as a being into a certain area and pervading the area and experiencing it. That's healthy memory. This memory where you store stuff up. I mean, these are engrams you're talking about, you know, these permanent pictures that don't go away. You know, you have to be able to get rid of all your pictures. I mean, if I was sitting here remembering everything that happened today, it would take such a computer the size of a house. You know, maybe not anymore, but they don't. The point is, they don't understand this. If you can teach if you can educate a person, and really, what you call auditing or clearing, it's really education. You're really educating them, and if you can teach them so that they catch themselves having an upset. If you don't have any upsets, you're not paying attention. But if you're holding on to it, this is pathological. So if you can have a person who's not walking around with chronic upsets, who does not have goals that conflict with their goals, whether the goal is conscious or not conscious, it doesn't matter. If the postulate is there, it's a postulate. If they can apprehend one of the 2 conflicting postulates, that's fine. If they can apprehend both of them, they can choose. It's like choosing from a Chinese menu and be done with it. If they learned what the effect of a withhold was, and I use the word withhold because it's a good withhold. They use it nest too. But if they understand what a withhold is, they become telepathic. reason people aren't telepathic is they're afraid if they can see what other persons are thinking, everybody can see what they're thinking, and that's totally horrid. They can't have that. So if they can learn that a withhold compromises you.
It sabotages your own power.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you make a pass at your secretary. You make a pass at your secretary at work, and you come home. You think your wife can't see that on some level? What are you doing? You see? So you don't go around accumulating more withholds. And you become aware of traumas that follow you around, making you afraid to get in a boat, making you afraid to get on an airplane, making you afraid to get into a relationship, making you afraid to hold a job. You learn what thoughts do that. You have a Superman. Also, if you get to the point where they recognize misownership, that you have a thought that's incongruous and it's uncomfortable, are you sure it's yours? Where's it coming from? Ah, it's coming from my father. It's coming from this Yanu here. It's and you don't get all caught up in this. You have a Superman, and that's as close to clear as you're going to get. And it's dirty because clear is an absolute. And Hubbard said himself, absolutes are unobtainable.
As Alan said, clear or what?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You just learn how to work with the tools.
Hank?
Yes.
Have you met natural clears?
Let me get back to this again. Define clear, David.
Well, let me just get to the point. I don't like the way you say that. Because I've met two people in my life that their space, their presence was, there's no words for it, was so warm and clean. And one was a woman and one was a man. One was my doctor, a man, and another was a woman that worked in the emergency intake in the hospital here. Like you just wanted to go right, share exactly the same space with them, just like two magnets want to get inside of each other.
That's wonderful. At the moment you met them, that's what was going on for them. Somebody said that Mark Jones was the clearest person that they'd ever. That was you, Roger.
Well, I acknowledge him as, well, Alan actually acknowledged him as an ascended being. As an ascended being,
okay.
He was clear.
He was a wonderful person.
I mean, saintly.
I'll tell you, he had a case. He had issues.
Oh yeah.
He had stuff he was working on where he wasn't what I would call clear.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the stuff that I work on, so I could be very condescending. Looking at him as a practitioner and thinking, well, he certainly doesn't have that together, but we all have something together. The clearest person that I've ever seen who works very hard on it was the Dalai Lama. I mean, this guy was just magical. I saw him once. And I know that he has said when he was a child, he used to be fascinated with ordnance, cannons and military hardware and stuff.
Ah, ordnance, not orgasms. Okay.
Ordnance.
You never know.
Okay. So anybody who's here is working on something. This idea of clear being an absolute, this is a marketing concept.
Yeah.
And it works on some people.
I knew my doctor for about 3 years, and it was like that every time I was with him.
Okay, that's when you're with him.
Yeah.
I can go into an altered state when I do a session. I can be extremely patient, extremely empathic, very considerate, and the person
free from your own case.
Yeah. No case. The person can walk away thinking that he has been talking to Jesus.
God. Seriously.
You know? But if you live with me, you know that I am impatient. I'm sarcastic. I'm
Well,
biting,
yeah, I
and
know you.
uh, you know, and I've got a lot to work on.
Yeah,
I mean, I had so much to work on just to be in a marriage. You know, my first marriage failed, and you know, there was a lot wrong coming from the other side, but she had a lot to deal with that I don't think Norma has to deal with. I hope. Not going.
well,
Not going.
Norma's wearing a saintly smile here.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Well,
anything.
well, yeah. Norma
You
is
got to be married to a psychotherapist. That's why.
well. She's very good herself, and she's a very good therapist, and she's as perfect as I've found anybody.
Yeah.
You know.
I need a psychotherapist too for a wife.
You're a genius, and to have captured her, Hank.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you
But
know,
there is a little trick on this clear thing. I mean, there's levels of case. And at a human level, you know, the usual emotions, the usual conflicts, and the usual make wrongs, and the usual jazz that upsets people between people, that's pretty low level. And a lot of people are free from that. And when you meet them, they're terribly peaceful, very harmonious. Now, the Dalai Lama being a case in point, way disconnected from all the usual stuff, and they'll feel very saintly.
usual perfect stuff, but he's not disconnected from what's happening in Tibet.
Oh no, I know that.
He's not disconnected from what happens when he talks to refugees.
Right.
You know, he's
That's
affected
very
very deeply, and the guy wakes up 4 a.m.
Yeah.
doing pujas and stuff to keep himself in that condition.
Right.
He
So
works hard.
that's a real ability, you see. So he's operating at a higher level of
Yeah.
understanding of his spiritual powers and presence and capacities, which is not normal in Western civilization. I mean, I remember when I went to Europe, I traveled by boat actually, and one of the ports of calls I had was Bombay, and had a business dealing with an Indian guy there. And so after we did our business, I said to him, Sufi, where's a good place for me to eat lunch? Now, Bombay is like a bloody big sewerage in those days, 1965. It was pretty ugly. And he said, what sort of food do you like, Roger? And I said, well, I was doing research on nutrition at the time. So I said, I'm a vegetarian. He thought I was English, actually. He didn't realize I was an Australian. He said, an Englishman who's a vegetarian, what is your religion? And I said, well, I'm Christian. Not really, I was not brought up. He said, Christianity, that quaint religion which does not believe in reincarnation. And at that time, you know, certainly in Australia, and I don't know about in Europe, but we were so spiritually illiterate that when Hubbard came along, we all thought he was a bloody genius.
Mm-hmm. No, he was a genius. He was a genius. You know, he was a genius. You know.
Yeah.
Werner von Braun was a genius too.
Yeah. Good one.
You know, the idea of I know that people hold on to this idea of clear even after they give up on Scientology, want nothing to do with Hubbard, but they still think in terms of clear, and their great regret, their great resentment is they never attained the state of clear that was promised.
What they thought it should have been accomplished, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a falsely declared condition by Hubbard. It was effectively, you know, bad science, if not a fraud.
Yeah, I don't know. Far be it for me to rag on somebody's belief system unless they're trying to force it on me, which there was some of that.
Yeah.
And when I got out of it, I got out of it, and for all the work that David Mayo did, they still had him out in the desert running around the tree.
Yeah.
For punishment,
Trying to fix him.
so really, one should be able to socialize with Sufis, with Muslims, with with cannibals. Really, if you really know who you are and you know who they are.
Yeah, and if you can appreciate their state of being and their systems of belief and why do they do what they do,
yeah,
all get along together. That's rather a good
idea. I feel very apologetic to people who have held on to this for a long time and are constantly inviting me to come in and talk about things in the terms that they're comfortable with. But I just can't. I can't always do that. Well, we've been going now for 2 hours, and it seems like we're in a good heading off place here. I had an idea of offering a meter refresher training via Zoom. I don't know if present companies are good candidates for that. Somebody might be, but is there anybody that thinks that they might have an interest in this?
Well, I want to take a meter course someday. Like, I have no training, but I just know about it.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that would be fine. It's David, right?
Yeah.
I saw your name light up. I can't see your face. Okay. What about Paul?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Okay. And George, you?
No, not thanks. No thanks, not this time.
Okay. Well, you made that clear before, but so I thought I just thought I would.
And I'd like to point out one thing about David Mayo. David Mayo did do the running program. He did that. He could have done a lot of other things like walk away, but he actually chose to jog around a post or a pole.
Yeah, well, that's good for him.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The gun wasn't put to his head. He could have walked off. Anybody there who whine and cry, I don't care who they are, Debbie Cook or Vicky Azaran, and they whine and cry, yet these people were in a position to make a difference when they were in power, and then they act the victim. I am sick and tired of it, and it goes to my point about being who you are, doing what you're doing, where you want to be, as being like ground zero.
Yeah, it comes to mind. Somebody was at a lecture by Krishnamurti, and that person, one of the people in the audience, asked him about another religious teacher who Krishnamurti was, known to be antagonistic with. So he asked Krishnamurti about, what about Shri, whatever his name is. And Krishnamurti said, he is on his path.
Oh, that's so sweet. I'll quote you somebody. You might recognize this guy. Lived a long time ago. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. We are formed and molded by our thoughts. Those whose minds are shaped by selfish thoughts cause misery when they speak or act. Sorrows roll over them as the wheels of a cart roll over the tracks of the bullock that draws it. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. We are formed and molded by our thoughts. Those whose minds are shaped by selfless thoughts give joy whenever they speak or act.
Joy follows them like a shadow that never leaves them.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
That's
It
good.
sounds very Buddhistic.
Who wrote that?
Buddha, twin verses, Dhammapada.
Uh-huh. That's
Ah.
good. I actually have a little saying that I put down on my forum, which is basically that existing conditions are the result of earlier wrong answer solutions.
Damn right. Damn right, Roger. Damn right.
Norma got that.
Roger, you're too far
So
away from your
clever. Hang on
microphone.
to that girl. She's a star.
So, is there anybody has anything to say or ask before we end off? We're counting down here, and I am going to end off in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. Thanks for coming, guys.
Well done,
Bye.
Ronnie. Well done,
Thank you.
Norma. Well done, Dave and George and everybody.
Yeah, Keith, you can call me or
Thank
write
you.
me anytime. You got my email address. You can write me.
All right.
Do it
Okay.
again, Hank.
Thank
You
you
just-
so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.